Hey, come on up and introduce yourself. We're looking forward to this.
I took off my knee brace, so a little unstable here. Good morning.
Morning.
So good to see everyone here. So I'm going to set my timer so I behave myself, otherwise we'll be here until noon. So first of all, that is not your grandma, and we will be showing you that today. So if you were worried about that, just relax. All right, so today we're going to talk about these things called so-called ape men. Are they real? Are they fake? Are they somewhere in between? What are these things that our kids are being taught about in public schools? So first of all, why do topics like this matter? I get that question a lot about, isn't it all about Jesus? Well, yes, it is. But here's what's going on. There was a study done about 10 years ago, and they interviewed 1,200 people in their 20s that had walked away from the Christian faith, and they started asking them lots of questions going, why did you leave? And so they distilled it down and did all their analysis, but based upon that survey and looking at across the United States, they predicted that 2 out of 3 kids that are in church are going to walk away when they hit their faith. How many of that just rocks your world? That's an awful thing, okay? So why is this happening? Well, one of the big things is that people are confused about where did we come from? You know, they're under the assumption that science has disproven the Bible. Now, a lot of topics are fun to discuss and different things, but when you think about it, this one is really important because depending on how you answer this question, determines your values and your morals and your life choices, okay? So what's interesting about this, I'm sure most of you recognize that Parade of Progress or different versions like that. So there have been some churches out there who have tried to reconcile these two views, that we evolved from ape-like creatures, when the Bible clearly tells us that, what? We were created by who? God. Yeah, okay. So because if evolution is true, by the way, that's your family tree. Now, don't you feel special? I mean, I do see a resemblance on, Uncle Harry there, but no, just kidding. But, when you go, well, wait a minute, Dave, isn't human evolution a scientific fact? I mean, it's in all the textbooks. Well, Hollywood sure says so. Lots of different movies about ape men and different things there. This is an actual picture that I took with my phone out of a 6th grade textbook. So what it says here is that millions of years of evolution have occurred, and that's where we came from. So the key to understanding all this is to realize that there's 2 types of science. So the first type is observational, the second is historical. And how many of you have done an experiment? How many of you have burned something down, blown something up? Okay, you did an experiment, right? So observational science, the idea is we come up with ideas and then we test them to see if it's a good idea or a bad idea, and then we'll repeat the test, and that's how things are invented, like planes, trains, clones, and drones. The thing about this type of science is your worldview, what you think about God and your origins, really doesn't matter a lot. I mean, it does on some of the things that you study, your ethics. But if you mix A plus B, you're going to get C, regardless of your worldview. Would you agree with that? So there's another type of science, though, and this is the one that deals with origins. And the idea is that we dig up these fossils. The problem is you can't really test a lot about fossils. You can look at the shape, and you can do an analysis of the chemicals and so on and so forth. You can measure it. But when it comes to going beyond that and knowing about the creatures, especially if they're extinct, your worldview is everything. We all have the same evidence, the same fossils, but what you bring to the table in terms of your worldview, your bias, has a tremendous impact on what you see, okay? That is Artie. We'll be talking about her in just a little bit. I don't know about you, but that looks like E.T., right? Go home, little alien, smashed alien thing, right? But you will have educated people look at that and go, I see an ape man, or an ape woman in this case. And then other people who believe in God's word will say, no, that is an extinct ape. So that is one of the things that I train students all the time is when you hear that scientists have found a missing link, there are 3 things that we should ask. Number 1 is, what did they actually find? I'm going to show you some examples that'll just blow your socks off in terms of what they actually found versus the drawings they made, okay? Number 2 is, what is the worldview of the person that is telling you this information? Do they believe in God? Do they not believe in God? Because again, it is so subjective, so I need to know more about the person who's giving me this information to know how to properly deal with it. And then, of course, as a Christian, I say, what does the Bible say? Which should be number 1, but it's number 3 on this list. But how can I look at this through a biblical worldview? For example, the Bible clearly tells us there were no prehumans. Okay, there it is. The Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. There is one well-known long-age creationist out there who teaches that God breathed into a Neanderthal. Okay, because he's trying to reconcile what he thinks is hard, rock science with the Bible. So, all right. So our mission today is to take some of these ideas and bring them to the light of Scripture, okay, and to just cast them out. Let's start with this. In 1922, scientists found a tooth. What'd they find? One tooth. And from that tooth, they made Mr. and Mrs. Nebraska Man. Aren't they lovely? Need a little makeover there. And this went all around the world. This is a cut-off version of the full shot that was in the London Illustrated News, was circulated through the world at that time. Okay? So they had said, all the headlines said, Darwin is proved right. We have proof of evolution based upon what? One tooth. So about 10 years after that, they got more funding, and they went back to the site to look for more fossils. And they found a very similar tooth. This one was attached to a jaw, the jaw of a pig. So, Nebraska Man was a pig. I'm not talking about his hygiene habits. He was an actual pig. And yet this was taught to students as proof for evolution. That's what I mean by, what fossil did they actually find? Because we see the pictures, right? All right, here's another one. Are textbooks ever wrong? Now kids go, I don't know, Dave. You guys know. Okay, so 1912, scientists found right here, I'll show you what they found. This is a replica. Okay. So you see the black parts here on this cast here? That is what they actually found. The white has been reconstructed. Now what they said is they have found proof of evolution that this is an ape-man skull. All right? And what's interesting about it is they went ahead, and I'll pass this around. Phil, who's the name on this cover of this book?
Bill down there.
Uh-huh. So they made college text for this. That was a college textbook reading. And so this is what they did. They gave it a scientific name. They made a book on it. Now, about 40 years later, they were going to name a national park after Piltdown Man. So one person said, just to be sure, can we see the fossils again? So when they looked at the actual fossils, by the way, fossils are usually kept in a vault, and because they're rare, and if you're a friend, you get to see them. The rest of us have to deal with replicas, okay? So what they found when they took a close look at the fossils is it was an ape man. Somebody had taken an ape jaw and a human skull cap and put them together. They had filed it down. So they had filled in areas, they had broken off pieces that would have shown that it was a fraud, and they stained it to look like they belonged together. That means for 40 years, this was taught to students, and it's a lie. Now, Nebraska was a mistake. Somebody just got too zealous and went way ahead of the data. This was a deliberate lie. And again, how did they get away with it for so long? Because everybody else was dealing with the replicas, and you can't see the details on the replica that would have teed off to the fact that it was made.
Have they recanted that now?
They have.
Okay.
And they don't like to talk about this, by the way. Understandably.
Sure.
Okay. So Neanderthal man. So I remember, so this is what they found. This is one of the first renderings. Kind of looks like my mother-in-law playing pinochle. No, did I say that? Sorry, scratch that off the tape. No. Seriously though, this was the drawing they made of this brute thing carrying a club that you really didn't want to meet in an alley. Well, since then, they have found literally hundreds of these skeletons in different sites. And here's what they've found. Skeletons were very human-like, because they are. They made tools, musical instruments, and jewelry. They buried their dead, and they would put implements from that person's life in the graves. These were people. Now, I want to call your attention to this gentleman at the top. You know, people, he's a Russian boxer. People can have really different shaped skulls. But I would not call him less than human. He beat me up, right? Because that'd be wrong, first of all. But the point is, people see what they want to see. You know, and it really is that whole idea about subjectivity. When I dig up a bone and I apply my ideas to it, and depending on who funded me, I'm going to find an ape man, because I'm not going to get paid if I found monkey bones, right? So there's a lot of pressure within these different areas to come up with results.
Doesn't he work for Geico?
So those are humans. Now, I promised you Artie. We're not going to go too crazy over Artie, but here we go. That's what they found. If you go down to the Museum of Natural History in Los Angeles, you will see a full Artie display, showing her walking upright, looking very pensive, like, hey, what's for dinner, or whatever. This is a mess. This was actually 36 Arties. This is not from one specimen. This is a bunch of little smashed up Artie pieces all over the place. Some of the people that worked on the site said it looks like Irish stew. Now, I'm Irish, and I know that my mom or dad used to throw anything that, they could find in Irish stew, right? It tasted good. But anyway, the point is, to go from that skeleton and do the things they're doing, what are they doing? They're extrapolating beyond the evidence based upon their worldview. Now, the one thing that is clear in this, look at the hands and feet, okay? So if you were to look at the difference between a human hand and a human foot versus chimpanzee, you see that opposable thumb on the feet? That's a dead giveaway that this is an ape, all right? So we can really tell the difference, because all you have to do is look at modern apes today, and you will see that it's clearly different. But that didn't stop them from just pushing the point of view that Artie is, again, our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma. All right. So what the evidence actually shows is that she was an extinct ape. Now what makes this more difficult is when you find these fossils, they're corroded, they're degraded. They've been in the ground for thousands of years, and they're just not in pristine shape. All right, let's talk about the start of the show. I know I'm going quickly, but I really want to just pour into you on this. So Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy, that's her. So on the skull, I'll pass this around. That's what they found on Lucy's skull. Okay. Now, since then, they have found more little Lucys. So when I say Lucy from now on, I'm talking about the Australopithecine, which is a big word. So we're just going to say Lucys. So what you're going to see from here on out is a composite of what all the little Lucys show us, okay? All right, by the way, on this here, this is a replica of Lucy's skull. And you see the brown pieces? Hopefully you can see that back there. That's what they found, which is what you've got being passed around. The rest is what they made, okay? All right, so go after Lucy. So what does Australopithecus means? Australo means southern, Pithecus means ape. So even her name means southern ape, okay? And she was found in the Afar region, therefore the afarensis. But where did Lucy come from? Well, Donald Johanson was listening to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds as he dug her up. I'm not making this up. That's where he gave her the name Lucy. Okay? All right. So this is in the textbooks. Name means southern ape. Appeared in Africa about 4 to 5 million years ago. Walked like we do. We're going to take a good look at that. And then was about 1/3 the size of humans. So when I go to a museum and I see some Lucy thing as tall as I am, okay, 3 feet tall is what it should be. So right off the bat, they're playing with the data, okay? All right, here's what we've been told, that all scientists agree that Lucy is our ancestor. that she lived about 3 to 5 million years ago. They keep changing that, by the way. Lucy walked upright like we do, and that scientists have over 400 specimens that prove that all this is true. Okay? Here's what you won't be told. All scientists do not agree that she's our ancestor, even other evolutionists. They often fight and argue with each other, which is great for me, because then I lift out their arguments against each other, right? But the idea is there's no consensus that Lucy is our ancestor, but you will see it in the textbooks like this is an established fact. The fossil evidence, which we're going to go through, sure seems to indicate she was an ape. And then sculptures like this one, that is very misleading based upon the data. Okay, look at the face. Look at the hand, and she's been to modeling school, by the way. She knows to point the toe in the front. So anyway, but what are they doing with that? What they're doing, unfortunately, is they're trying to convince the kids and the adults that this is your great-grandma, okay? So I'm going to show you a video, and I want you to listen it's a very short video. Listen very carefully, please, to this, and then we'll unpack it.
We now have 400 specimens of Lucy species, Australopithecus afarensis, named after the Afar region. And we know that they're very large individuals, which were males, and the smaller ones are certainly females.
All right, that was Donald Johanson, much later in life, producing this video. So what did he say? We now have 400 specimens. Now, do you see the parade there of Lucy's? All walking down the street, yay, brights, whatever they're doing, right? So you see these skeletons, and immediately your mind goes, they have 400 skeletons of this thing? Wow. These are the specimens.
Wow.
About 25% of that is teeth.
Wow.
That's what they actually found. Again, back to that key question, what did they actually find versus what they're showing us? It's really a key question. That is about the size of a large picnic table. Okay? That is the entire Hadar collection family.
What were the conditions of them finding them as far as, was it in mud? Is it in...
So what they do is they find these things in mud mixed in with lots of animal bones scattered over wide areas. I mean, it is exhausting work to try to sort out what you've got. In fact, one of her parts belonged to a baboon that they for years thought belonged to Lucy. So, and you don't find these things laying all in a nice little pile most of the time. You find them scattered and busted up. So great question. Okay. So, but to me, that video was misleading because it showed 400 little Lucys parading down the street based upon this little pile of bones because they're trying to convey that this is fact, right? So anyway, let's take a look at the evidence in the remaining time that we have. We're going to look at the skull, the hands, the wrist bones, the toes, and the pelvis. Are you ready? Coffeeed up, sugared up? All right. All right, the skull on the left is, this is where you interact. Human. Skull on the right is, okay, raise your hand if you can give me one difference.
One's human.
Yeah, or you could popcorn it. Popcorn it.
One section complete while the other one isn't.
Good.
In the cranium,
Good. What else?
eyes,
Yep. What else?
nose.
Yep. Head and shoulder, knees. No, sorry. Anyway, there's lots of differences. Would you agree? Okay, so this is a replica, thankfully, it's not my ancestor, of a human skull, right? So one of the things that you look at is the jawbone goes parallel with the ground. That's how you know how to hold these things, okay? So notice how flat the face is, right? And I mean, some people do have kind of a slope face, but more or less, most people have just kind of this flat face. Bigger skull cavity, why? Because most apes are smarter than most people, right? Nope, just kidding. People are smarter than most apes, all right? So, and you look at eye orbits and different things. See the difference now?
Okay.
You really see it when these are actual size. See the difference? We're talking about a little tiny thing, okay? So hopefully you can see that over there. So there are lots of differences that we can point to and say that clearly doesn't look human. We do know what it looks like. This is a little creature called a bonobo. Interesting? Clearly looks more like a bonobo. Now, my jaw kind of broke off a little bit, so it's jutting to the teeth a little bit, but you get the idea. You can look at the picture up there and get a really good at. So this is what we're talking about. Now, when I teach kids, I say, okay, so looking at that face, one thing to remember, it is sloped and ape-like. And I have them put up their hands. I know this is Sunday school, right? We can do this. Put up your hand. Go sloped and ape-like. That was Lucy's skull. Now, I taught 6th graders, and I got a call from a parent saying, who is Big Wave Dave? What's up? Her class, public school class, went to the Museum of Natural History. She stood in front of the Lucy exhibit and taught all 30 of her classmates this lesson with hand motions. Thankfully, her mom was a Christian and was happy about it. Teacher wasn't so happy. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. All right. You ever seen an ape do this? They're really good at that, right? I can't do that, can you? Okay, the reason that they're really good at that is because their fingers and toes are what? Long and curved. They're designed for climbing, right? So you can see that. What does Lucy's hands look like? Do they look like that statue? Oh, no. Okay. When you look at and you do the analysis on the actual fossils, you'll find that her hands were curved and ape-like. So earlier, we were told that Lucy walked upright like we do. Why does she have hands built for swinging, climbing? Is that a fair question? Why would she need that? Okay. So if you look at it, and by the way, too soon, stop it. This is a statement from an evolutionist. Surprisingly, similar to the hands found on the small and pygmy chimpanzee. Why is it surprising? Because he's looking for human ancestors, right? Isn't that interesting? I love that word in there. It's like this is an honest admission. All right, so Lucy's hands up. Lucy's hands were curved and ape-like. So we got the skull. Lucy's skull was sloped and ape-like. Lucy's hands were curved and ape-like. Good. They're doing great. I like this. Some people go, you ever seen an ape do this? That's called knuckle walking.
Yeah.
Where does an 800-pound ape sit? Anywhere it wants to, exactly, yes. Okay, so why can apes do that so well? It's because they have special wrist bones that lock into place. Now, if we try this, you're going to hurt yourself.
Yeah.
I did a relay with kids once upon a time. I won't be doing that again. We were trying to do a knuckle walk relay with 2 hurt kids. It was a disaster. So, because again, apes have that special wrist bone. People don't. What about Lucy? Wrist bones that lock into place for knuckle walking. If Lucy walked like we do, why does she have hands that are curved and built for climbing and wrists that lock into place for knuckle walking? Is that fair? So see, that's what I mean by when you look at the fossils and get past all the pictures that they're saying, you really do see what the evidence shows. All right, so one more time with the hands, please. Lucy's wrist could lock into place for knuckle walking, and punch the person next to you, make sure they're awake. Okay, good. All right. See, apes have longer hands and fingers because they were designed to be apes. We were designed to be totally different than that. What about our toes? Now, on Lucy, they did not find any toes. But remember I said earlier, I'm talking about all the Australopithecine now? Okay, so here's what the toes show. Fact, toes are long and curved, even compared to apes. Curved hands and feet are good for what? Trees, all right? And then here we go. Here's a scientist with Answers in Genesis saying she did not have human feet. So everything about that statue that we've been looking at is just fantasy. And scientists have actually challenged. That one was in the museum at St. Louis. When people challenged it, they said it's artistic license. We could do whatever we want. It doesn't have to reflect reality. All right. By the way, what are those hands and feet good for? More than that, harassing tigers. Now this came from a much longer clip, and I have a confession to make before Jesus. I started rooting for the Tigers. That little thing just kept going by and grabbing in the air and taking off, or like they could not even come close to catching him. So anyway, all right. Did Lucy really walk like us? Well, so far we've talked about everything but the pelvis. Human pelvic bones are very different than apes. Okay, if you've ever walked, we just take it for granted. Now, can apes walk on 2 feet? They do, but they look like a baby with a full diaper. Back and forth, right?
Yeah.
And that has to do with the hip bones, all right? So what are Lucy's pelvic bones similar to?
Apes.
Now, the evolutionists knew that this was a problem. They knew that this was going to be a big problem with the evidence. So here's what they did. I'm going to show you a clip that was on PBS. It's about a minute long, but listen carefully to what the narrator says, please.
The ape that stood up. It was a revolutionary idea. We needed Owen Lovejoy's expertise again, because the evidence wasn't quite adding up. The knee looked human, but the shape of her hip didn't. Superficially, her hip resembled a chimpanzee's, which meant that Lucy couldn't possibly have walked like a modern human. But Lovejoy noticed something odd about the way the bones had been fossilized.
When I put the two parts of the pelvis together that we had, this part of the pelvis has pressed so hard and so completely into this one that it caused it to be broken into a series of individual pieces which were then fused together in later fossil. This has caused the two bones, in fact, to fit together so well that they're in an anatomically impossible position.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
Wow. Wow. Now, I don't know anything about Dr. Lovejoy. Is it possible that his worldview is interfering with his interpretation of that? So the one that really caught me was he put it back together the way it was before Lucy died. How would he know that? These creatures don't exist today. We don't have any other ones to compare it to. So how would he know that? Well, that's where his worldview kicked in. He's looking for a human ancestor. Now, I've heard people say that hip was in an incorrect position, but here's what other evolutionists said: he went too far. So, but unfortunately, in the museums, you'll see the one that looks like a human based upon that guy's work. Ouch! Now, everybody in this room is at least over 20, I think. Imagine being in 6th grade and being taught this stuff. Your Sunday school teacher just taught you about Adam and Eve and creation, and you go into class and you're hit with this stuff. Wow. Is it any wonder why kids are going, the Bible's not true? Because they know, they're smart, that the two can't go together, right? And so that's why it's so important, and I'm delighted that you're here and that we're doing this weekend, just to show you just how important this topic is. Okay, so what was Lucy? That is my opinion, this is what the evidence shows. That is at Answers in Genesis Museum. And if you see the holographs with the green, those are the fossils. So what they've done is they've done their own reconstruction of Lucy based upon what do we got? The skull was sloped and ape-like. Hands were curved and ape-like. Lucy's wrists could lock together for knuckle walking, right? And her feet were curved and ape-like. And her pelvis was a mess. Okay. All right. Yes.
If a Christian tried to show that tried to do something similar, saying there were angels, and because wings from above a big bird or something, and I don't know.
Right.
And that's what they did.
They did well.
Science will be in an uproar.
Right. Right. So what they do on this is they keep sifting through and changing the story to make it work with their preconceptions. And like I said, okay. So Lucy's skull was? Yes, sir.
So I don't want to steal your thunder, but one of the other things when they show these artists' conceptions,
Yep.
they show Lucy with white in her eyes.
Yes, they do. And there's only been one case of an ape with whites in its eyes that I'm aware of out of.
And there's no way they could know
Right,
that from the
right.
fossil record.
Exactly. What's the goal? To make it look more human. So here's what the evidence show. Skull sloped, very ape-like. By the way, I forgot to mention this. Apes don't have nasal bones. If you feel your own nose, you feel that bone in there. So next time you go to the zoo, reach up and grab an ape's face and kind of wish it around. No, don't do that. You'll notice that their nose is not rigid. Okay. Fingers, curved and ape-like, designed for hanging, climbing. Wrist, lock into place for knuckle walking. Feet, again, Australopithecine, not the original Lucy. We do have now enough feet to work with, curved and ape-like. Pelvis is a mess. You can only really extrapolate based upon your worldview. All right, and remember the 400 Lucys walking down the street? There they are. That's really what it should show. Not little Lucys marching down the street. Okay.
What happens when they play with tigers?
Yep. All right. So, this is an interesting quote. This is Charles Oxnard, professor of anatomy, and he is a leading expert on Australopithecus fossils. Here's what he says. The Australopithecines known over the last several decades are now what? Irrevocably removed from a place in the evolution of human bipedalism. In other words, walking, right? Now, I found this. I don't know if they still have this up. I did a screen grab real quick. When I found this was the Smithsonian Institute. Okay, look at what they've done to Lucy. She got demoted. She got moved into another branch of their tree of life. Not even in the same branch anymore. So now what they're saying, at least in science, is that we both evolved from an ape-like ancestor. What's in the textbooks? Lucy's your grandma. Went to a middle school, public middle school. They were doing Lucy posters all up and down the hallway showing why she was our ancestor. Ouch. All right. So, was she our ancestor? Nope. And I like to just kind of do this because the evidence clearly shows that she wasn't. All right. 3 questions. A reminder. What fossils did they find? Look at the evidence. It takes work. It really does, to try to find out what bones they're actually dealing with. Number 2, what is the worldview? Because it's going to affect interpretation of the fossils. And here's the thing I just want to call out. These people aren't lying necessarily. They're telling something that's not true. And what's the difference? Lying is when I know something's not true and I tell you. That's a lie. If I tell you that something is not true that I believe, that's different. So I like to think of as evolutionists as lost, not the enemy. They truly do believe this stuff. And so when they share it, early on in my ministry, I've been doing this, I'll tell you more about myself during the second session. Early on in my ministry, I got myself in trouble because what I had inadvertently done is set a student against their teacher in public school. Big Wave Dave says, "You're a liar." Who? What? Oh, okay. What I had to teach the kids is this. Because when you think about it, your teacher teaches you that 2 + 2 = 4, and that you evolved from ape-like creatures. What is a kid supposed to do with that? Right? So what I will teach the kids is that are in public schools, I get access through Sunday school classes. Your teacher is absolutely correct about the math, and we can test that and prove that. When you're talking about things in the past, people have different opinions, and some of them are mistaken. I do not use the L word. It makes sense? Because we don't want them they need to show respect for their teachers, and they need to try to process why is some of what's coming at me true and why is some of it not. My son actually gave a Debunking Human Evolution book to his teacher in 5th grade, public school, for Christmas. Yes, that was sneaky, but it worked out just really fine. Okay, almost done here. Again, how can we see these things through biblical worldview? Because when you start with man's word, you're always going to head down the wrong path. Does it matter? Yeah. And here's the crux of it, is if we truly came from slime and we are nothing more than evolved apes, then who makes the rules? We do. And more specifically, the government does. They determine what's right and wrong, what's hate speech, what's not, and so on and so forth, right? It really is, I have found over the years, it's not a head problem, it's a heart problem. People believe in this stuff wholeheartedly because they want to be in control of their own lives. And that is the hardest thing about Christianity, is surrendering your life to somebody you can't physically see, right? It's tough. All right. So here's the reason I think it matters the most. I was a skeptic until I was 29 years old. I was one of those guys that went around challenging people, and I could dismantle them pretty quickly. I'm not proud of that. I'm just telling you my background. Because I had all these science questions, and I couldn't get any answers. People would tell me, Jesus did this for me, and I appreciate that. But I knew Muslims and other people that their religion had done things for them. So every time I asked a science question, I got nothing but a blank stare back. Okay? So that kept me from believing the Bible. I wouldn't even open the Bible. I had been taught I went to private school, Catholic school for the first 4 years, but we weren't allowed to touch the Bible, by the way. You had it read to you. You're not allowed to touch it. Okay? So I really had an attitude about it, and then I interrupted a drug deal while I was buying a crib for my son. And I bought the crib, and I went around back to pick up the crib and load it. And there was an old man there. He was about 85 years old. And he was there, and he told these guys, there are lots of guns, drugs, you name it. He said, gentlemen, you need to leave. Just in a nice calm voice. And they did, without shooting us. Okay, they put their guns and all their stuff away, and they drove away. I'm just going. So I asked the old man, I said, old man to me, I was 29. I said, why aren't you scared? He said, young man, I'm going to heaven when I die. How about you?
Amen.
And then he laid out the gospel from the beginning. Did you know that God created you? And my jaw was on the ground because this guy, he had it going on, right? And I'm just sitting there with my jaw on the ground. He goes, you want to accept Jesus? Like, not yet. I'm still processing. The wheel's still spinning, right? So anyway, on the way home, I felt the Lord calling to me in my mind. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, don't I need candles and incense and red carpets to do this? It's like, no, Dave, just give yourself up. So I did, and I asked the Lord to do one thing for me. I know we're not supposed to bargain with the Lord, but I had an alcoholic mother and a father with a hot temper. And so I grew up very hot-headed. Wouldn't take much to start a fight with me. I wasn't very good at fighting. I got my butt kicked a lot. But I asked the Lord to remove my rage, and he did. So much so that the next day when I went to SMUD at my job, a friend came up to me and said, Dave, are you on drugs? Now, I had always kept my rage under control at work and whatnot, and I wasn't a mean guy, but I wasn't walking around with a silly smile on my face until that day, and they went, what is going on? And so I got to tell everybody what I had done. So anyway, I am so grateful to the Lord, but I still vividly remember those 29 years of just having intellectual, to where I wasn't, all I can say is that I know that the Holy Spirit saves people, okay, by leading them to Christ. But if your heart is so hard that you're not listening, it makes it a lot harder. So our ministry, what I like to say is we try to break up the rocky ground so that the Holy Spirit, the seeds of the gospel can go in and produce fruit, right? Because there's so many people like me, I wouldn't have listened at all until I found somebody who actually explained it, that God was the creator. And when you think about it, if God is not the creator, What authority does he have? Zip, nada, zilch, which is why the devil goes after it so hard. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, because at the end of the day, it is about this, and this does not work. Okay. This is my life verse, and many of you have seen this verse. And at first I used to focus on the always be prepared. Well, that's easy. I just study and learn from smart scientists. And then the Lord showed me one day through a conversation with my daughter the main point of this verse too. Always be prepared to give a answer. If you're given an answer, that means somebody asks you a question. Why are they asking you a question? This girl went up to my daughter and said, "What is wrong with you?" My daughter's like, what do you mean? Why are you so blankety blank nice? Yeah, blankety blank nice. My daughter's like, well, because Jesus said I have to be. Who? You see what just happened? This girl was a monster. And yet my daughter was kind to her consistently, and so she finally asked, what's up? Why are you different? Right? And then, by the way, that girl kept coming back and kept coming back and kept coming back, asking more questions. I don't know where she is today, but all I can know is that is the most important way of witnessing, is how we live our lives, to be loving and caring and hardworking, not perfect, but authentic. And it's different than the culture at large. And that's when people come up to you and say, what is up with you? And that's when all the apologetics come into mind. But at the same time, with the little kiddos, we need to teach them science, biblical worldview science, right? To where they know how to process this stuff. Okay? All right. By the way, last slide. These are some recommended resources. We have our own books. We have an app. I'll show you the app in a minute. But if you really want to nerd out on this stuff, Contested Bones. It's not Bones of Contention, which was Martin Neubauer, which is a very tough read. Okay, this is a different one that's a recent. That is the book that shows you all the different things about the fossils. Okay? All right, we have an app, and that's all I have. It is 10:37. I'm going to turn it back over to somebody, Phil. But thank you so much.
Very good. The day we'll be doing church this morning, we'll do the normal routine to start with singing and all this stuff. But then we'll be done about 12.